There was a man named Ayo Adewale, a billionaire in his 30s, who had everything anyone could ever dream of: luxury cars, sprawling estates, a private jet, and a business empire that stretched across Africa and beyond. Ayo's wealth and influence had made him a household name in Nigeria, and while he was respected in the business world and admired by many, he had a deep personal struggle, finding real love. Every woman he had ever dated seemed to fall for the same thing: his money. It was always the designer gifts, the first-class trips, and the lavish dinners that excited them. But when it came to him as a person, Ayo always felt like they didn't care. They loved what he could give them, not who he was inside. After years of failed relationships, Ayo became tired of the constant disappointment. He wanted to settle down and start a family, but he wasn't interested in a woman who loved him for his wealth. He wanted someone who would love him for his heart, his personality, and his values. He had seen it happen to some of his friends, but for him, it seemed impossible. Ayo's wealth had become both a blessing and a curse. Every woman he had ever dated seemed to fall for his money, not for him as a person. They loved the luxury cars, the first-class trips, and the designer gifts that came with being involved with him, but none seemed to care about the man behind the billions. It hurt Ayo deeply, and after years of failed relationships, he became disillusioned with love. He wanted something more meaningful, someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. One night, after yet another breakup with a woman more interested in flaunting her new designer bag than spending time with him, Ayo sat down with his best friend, Dapo. They were having drinks in Ayo's penthouse, overlooking the dazzling lights of Lagos. "I'm tired, Dapo," Ayo said, frustration lacing his voice. "Every woman I date only sees my money. I'm starting to think I'll never find someone who loves me for me." Dapo, who had been Ayo's closest friend since childhood, took a long sip of his drink and leaned back in his chair. "Bro, I've been telling you for years. These women see the luxury before they even see you. If you want to find someone who loves you for you, you've got to remove the wealth from the equation." Ayo frowned, confused. "What do you mean? What if you pretended to be poor?" Dapo said with a mischievous grin. "Move out of this penthouse, live like a regular guy, and see who you attract. You'll know for sure if the woman is into you or your billions." At first, Ayo thought the idea was ridiculous. He had grown accustomed to his life of luxury, surrounded by the finest things money could buy. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If he wanted to find true love, he had to step outside his wealth and see who he really was without it. It was the only way to be sure. But it wasn't going to be easy. Ayo knew his parents would never agree to this plan. They had always been protective of him, especially since he was their only son, the heir to the family fortune. When Ayo finally told his parents about his plan, they were horrified. "Ayo, you out of your mind," his mother, Mrs. Adewale, exclaimed. "You're our only son. You can't just move out of the mansion and live in some rundown area. What if something happens to you? Do you know how dangerous it could be?" His father, Mr. Adewale, was more composed but equally concerned. "Son, I understand that you're frustrated, but this is risky. People can be dangerous when they know someone like you has money. You're putting yourself in harm's way." But Ayo had already made up his mind. "I have to do this, Dad. I'm tired of living a life where people only see my wealth. If I don't do this now, I'll never know what real love feels like." His parents tried to talk him out of it, but eventually, they gave in, though they insisted that Dapo check on him regularly and that Ayo keep his identity hidden as much as possible. The following week, Ayo left his life of luxury behind. He moved out of his family's mansion and into a modest one-bedroom apartment in a lower-income neighborhood far from the wealthy district where he had grown up. He traded his designer clothes for simple, inexpensive outfits and swapped his flashy cars for an old, beat-up Toyota. He even took a job at a local hardware store to blend in with the local crowd. Only Dapo knew about his plan, and Ayo kept a low profile to avoid anyone recognizing him. Life without his billions was a shock to Ayo. He was used to gourmet meals, private jets, and being chauffeured everywhere. Now, he had to live like everyone else, budgeting his money, cooking his own meals, and taking public transportation. At first, he struggled, but over time, he started to adjust. He realized that living simply had its own rewards. He began to enjoy the slower pace of life, getting to know his neighbors and even playing football with the kids in the area on weekends. It was during one of his coffee breaks at a local cafe that Ayo met Adesuwa. Adesuwa was a young woman working at a nearby cafe, saving up to go back to school. She was kind, intelligent, and down-to-earth. Ayo noticed how she treated everyone with the same warmth and respect, whether they were wealthy or not. They struck up a conversation one afternoon, and Ayo found himself drawn to her. She wasn't impressed by material things, and since Ayo was living as a regular guy, she had no idea about his real identity. Over the next few weeks, Ayo and Adesuwa started spending time together. They went on simple dates, long walks in the park, eating at local food joints, and talking about their dreams and aspirations. Ayo had never felt so connected to someone before. Adesuwa was everything he had been looking for, someone who appreciated him for who he was, not what he had. As their relationship grew stronger, Ayo found himself falling deeply in love with her. But the closer they became, the more he feared the day when he would have to tell her the truth about who he really was. Would she still love him when she found out he wasn't a struggling hardware store worker but one of the richest men in Africa? After 6 months of dating, Ayo knew it was time to come clean. He couldn't keep the lie going forever, and Adesuwa deserved to know the truth. One evening, he invited her to his apartment for dinner. As they sat down to eat, Ayo took a deep breath. "Adesuwa, there's something I need to tell you," he began nervously. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Adesuwa looked at him, concerned. "What do you mean?" Ayo explained everything, his real identity, his family's wealth, and why he had pretended to be poor. He told her about his past failed relationships and how he had wanted to find someone who loved him for who he was, not for his billions. Adesuwa was silent for a long time, processing everything. Ayo's heart raced, fearing that she would walk out the door and never look back. But to his surprise, she smiled softly and took his hand. "Ayo, I fell in love with you for the person you are," she said gently. "Not for your money or your status. I don't care if you're a billionaire or a hardware store worker. What matters to me is the man I've gotten to know, the man with a good heart." Ayo was overwhelmed with relief. He had finally found someone who loved him for who he truly was. Adesuwa didn't care about his wealth, she cared about him as a person. Ayo introduced Adesuwa to his parents shortly after that. Though they were initially skeptical, they quickly grew to love her when they saw how happy she made their son. The once protective and doubtful Mrs. Adewale was now the biggest supporter of their relationship, and Mr. Adewale, too, welcomed Adesuwa with open arms. The wedding plans came quickly, and despite Ayo's wealth, the couple chose to have a simple yet elegant ceremony. Ayo had always envisioned a grand wedding in the past, but now that he had found real love, the extravagance didn't matter. What mattered was the people they loved being there. The wedding took place on a beautiful estate just outside Lagos. Instead of inviting thousands of people, they kept it intimate, with only close family and friends. The decorations were simple, white roses, soft lighting, and a breathtaking view of the sunset. As Adesuwa walked down the aisle, Ayo's eyes filled with tears. In that moment, he knew this was the love he had been searching for all his life. The ceremony was filled with laughter, joy, and heartfelt speeches. Even Dapo, Ayo's best friend and the mastermind behind the fake poor plan, gave a moving toast about how love had a funny way of finding you when you least expected it. When Ayo and Adesuwa exchanged their vows, it wasn't about wealth or status. It was about two people who had found each other in a world where appearances often mattered more than hearts. Their promises to each other were simple: to love, to support, and to grow together, no matter what. After the wedding, Ayo and Adesuwa settled into a life that balanced wealth and simplicity. They could have lived in any mansion, but they chose to stay in a comfortable home that allowed them to focus on what was most important: their growing family. A few years into their marriage, Adesuwa gave birth to their first child, a baby boy they named Tunde. Ayo was overjoyed to be a father, and for him, it was the ultimate blessing to have both a loving wife and a child to share his life with. Little Tunde brought even more joy into their home, and the couple found themselves cherishing the small moments, late-night feedings, first steps, and the sound of their son's laughter echoing through the house. As their family grew, so did their love. 2 years later, Adesuwa gave birth to a baby girl, Amina. With 2 children, Ayo felt like his life had finally come full circle. Despite the wealth and success that had defined much of his adult life, it was the love of his family that made him truly rich. Ayo's parents adored their grandchildren and often visited, doting on them and sharing stories about Ayo's childhood. The Adewale family was closer than ever, and Adesuwa had become an integral part of the family, loved not for her background or status, but for her heart. As their children grew, Ayo and Adesuwa made it a priority to teach them about humility and kindness. They didn't want Tunde and Amina to grow up thinking wealth defined their worth. Ayo often took them to the local community centers he had supported over the years, showing them the importance of giving back and helping those in need. Ayo also continued to support charities, investing in education, healthcare, and small businesses in rural areas across Africa. He believed in using his wealth to uplift others, knowing that love and generosity were far more valuable than material possessions. In the end, Ayo had found everything he had ever wanted: a woman who loved him for who he was, not for his billions, and a family that brought him more joy than all the money in the world ever could. His story became an inspiration to others, a reminder that true love is not found in wealth or status, but in the heart. In the end, Ayo had found what he had been searching for all along: a woman who loved him for the man he was, not for the money he had. And with Adesuwa by his side, he knew that their love was real, and no amount of wealth could ever buy that kind of happiness. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please give us a like and don't forget to subscribe. Stay tuned for more interesting stories. Your support is everything to our growing channel.